各位，当北京在前段时间宣布限制关键稀土和磁体材料出口的时候，华盛顿的第一反应并不是报复，而是沉默。一个拥有全球最强军工体系的超级大国，突然对一个供应链举措如此谨慎，这在冷战之后几乎从未出现过。因为美国终于意识到，经济胁迫这一场游戏不再是他一个国家的专利。新加坡学者马凯硕最近在一次演讲中提到，我们正见证人类2000多年来最激烈的结构性转变。一方面，全球经济力量的天平已经彻底倾斜。1980年，欧洲经济规模是中国的10倍，到今天，两者几乎持平。到了2050年，欧洲有可能只剩下中国的一半。同样的对比发生在印度和英国之间。100年前，1万的英国人能统治300万的印度人，而到本世纪中叶，印度的经济将是英国的4倍。这不仅是经济力量的转变，更是全球政治秩序的地震。问题在于，西方社会至今仍未完全醒来，他们仍在按旧秩序来生活，假期、会议、声明，而非战略的应对。相比之下，中国和印度早已重新定位。一个通过供应链掌握关键的资源，另外一个通过人口和制造业积累力量。尤其是中国在稀土这一无形的武器上，展现了全新的战略成熟。2010年中日海事冲突后，中国首次尝试稀土出口管制。15年以后，这一工具已经从钝器变成了一个精密的手术刀。当中国宣布限制关键材料出口，美国才第一次感受到反制的痛感，一种被同样手段针对的痛。这正是马凯硕想强调的关键。中国的稀土政策不只是资源的管控，而是一种地缘政治的重塑。它向世界发出信号，技术与供应链正在成为新的边界。过去美国可以用制裁、封锁、出口管制来削弱对手，如今对手也能用同样的逻辑来反击。更深层次的意义在于，这一对等的关系一旦形成，宣布单极时代的终结。华盛顿不再是掌握唯一的话语权，他必须学会在互相制约中重新定义竞争。马凯硕提出的警告是清晰的，真正的危险不是中美竞争的升级，而是西方仍用旧时代的地图来解读新的现实。当中国与印度、韩国与东盟等经济体持续崛起，全球的秩序板块正在移动，那华盛顿是否还能来得及调整航向呢？让我们来看一下视频。
It's important to emphasize that the scale of structural shifts we are witnessing today are among the greatest possibly, maybe even in 2,000 years of history. And it's important to understand that in our times, you must be prepared for some big surprises. So what I'm going to do is mention 2 structural shifts and 2 recent short-term surprises that have been, in some ways been a shock to global geopolitics. The first structural shift, of course, let's say if we compare, let's look at the 2 biggest giants in Asia, China and then India. In the case of China, in the year 1980, the combined GNP of the European Union was 10 times bigger than China, 1980. Today, European Union and China are about the same size. And by 2050, European Union will be half the size of China. So in one human lifetime, the European Union goes from being 10 times bigger than China to becoming half the size of China. Just one structural shift. But the Europeans haven't woken up and realized that that's where they are today.
They're on holiday.
And
September.
so that's right. They're still on vacation. In the case of India, I like to compare India to the United Kingdom, right? Because, I mean, that's a natural comparison. It's hard to believe that 100 years from now, 300 million of our ancestors from India were ruled by 100,000 Englishmen, right? 100 years ago, amazingly. And today, if you send 100,000 Englishmen to India, they'll be massacred. So, and even if you compare the British and UK and India, as recently as the year 2000, the British economy was close to 4 times bigger than India's, 3.6 times bigger. Year 2000. Today, UK is smaller than India. And by 2050, India will be 4 times bigger than UK. So look at that. 2000, the British are 4 times bigger. 2050, India is 4 times bigger. That's a major structural shift, which is why I wrote a Financial Times article saying it's time for UK to give up its permanent seat in the Security Council to India. I mean, the British should be gracious about it, right? They got to rule India for 200 years, so the least they can do is repay back India by giving their permanent seat to India. I'm surprised that that suggestion wasn't picked up in India by more people, you know. So when if those of you who have connections in Delhi, please call them and say, please echo that call. and I want to emphasize that this is not a frivolous point. This is actually a serious point. The one thing I learned after being ambassador to the UN for over 10 years is that the founders of the UN intended the veto to be given to the great powers of the day and not the great powers of yesterday, which is why the British have gone by their sell-by date already. And it's time for the British to give up their seat, in the permanent seat. And I want to emphasize that the British are acutely aware that their seat is hard to justify, which is why they haven't used their veto for over 40 years, 50 years. They dare not use their veto. The minute they use their veto, I really want to say, who are you? That's why they don't even dare to. So they are internally aware that the sell-by date has come. But so these are the structural shifts. But at the same time, even in the last 6 months, I must say that if you had asked me about these 2 things in January, would these 2 surprises have happened? In January, I would have said, no, not possible. But these 2 surprises have happened. The first surprise, right? You know, when Donald Trump first launched his trade war against China in his first term in 2018, the Chinese were defenseless. They didn't know what to do. And they were running around in circles trying to figure out how to respond to Donald Trump. And so they couldn't retaliate. They just had to take whatever Trump hurled at them. This time around, the Chinese are able to draw a red line in the sand and say, watch out. You touch me, I'm going to touch you equally painfully. And as you know, when they cut off the supply of rare earths and magnets, the pain was so excruciating. Suddenly you notice that the Trump administration is so polite towards China. Now, you look at the tone they adopt when they speak to China. So in the last 6 months, the big shift is that suddenly US has implicitly accepted China as its peer competitor. This just happened in the last few months. Big shift. And the other big surprise, if you had told me in January this year that, you know, India, which has been cultivated by president after president by the US, right, from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump 1 to Joe Biden, that this 27 years of cultivation would be wiped out in a few weeks. I would have said impossible. This is a deep commitment on the part of the US to the US-India relationship. It's bipartisan, one of the few bipartisan things. He will hold steady regardless of what happens. But you've seen how damaged the relationship has become. And it's amazingly painful because there are lots of unnecessary slights and blows to India. Like calling India a dead economy, right? Imposing additional tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Excuse me, China buys more Russian oil. How much were tariffs increased on China? 0. See? That's what I mean about China. And then look at the way Asim Munir was invited to the White House. Calculated insult. So all these things show that sometimes in geopolitics, what you don't expect can also happen.